Windsor as to what's going on. There's a great concern because instead of 2,500 jobs going to Canadians, apparently there 1,600 are going to go to temporary or taxpayer-funded foreign replacement workers. So we're looking at a situation here where we have 4 contracts that all mirror each other, we're told. And I know that in my case, I have actually had the privilege of reading the Volkswagen contracts. There are 2 of them. And the Stellantis deal mirrors that. They wanted the exact same rights that Volkswagen has, and that obviously includes the ability to bring in foreign workers. And I know what's not in those contracts. What's not in those contracts is a clause that guarantees that these will be Canadian jobs only. And we know that not only because of the media reports, but because the company itself has confirmed a couple of different numbers. On Tuesday, they said there would be 2,300 good, solid Canadian jobs, and they said they're bringing in 900 foreign workers for the setup, which is a big setup, and 600 permanent temporary or foreign workers, foreign-funded taxpayer workers into that plant. Not the 2,500 Canadian jobs that were announced permanently and the 2,500 jobs that the government announced, the Liberals announced when they said we would have construction workers in addition to that. It looks like the majority of workers at that plant are going to be from outside of Canada. And even the union itself is outraged by this lack of transparency. We need the contracts released. We're getting different stories. The minister initially said there was 1 or 2 jobs. Apparently the government thinks now there may be more. Now the Minister of Industry has decided that he wants to meet with the company to discuss the contract he signed to find out how many foreign workers are coming in. The Minister of Natural Resources tweeted last week, Minister Wilkinson, that of course there are foreign workers coming in. And the government can't seem to get its act straight. The Minister of Industry said, oh, there might be a few. The company says 1,600. And these mirror Volkswagen, which mirrors Northvolt in Quebec as well. In fact, the company in Quebec, the Swedish company in Quebec, has also said now publicly that on the weekend that they're bringing in taxpayer-funded foreign replacement workers. So it appears that the government, at least from what's set up, didn't do their homework. And the Minister of Industry now wants to renegotiate, apparently, the contract that he signed. He should have probably read it in the first place, which he clearly didn't. If he did, he would know that these companies have the right to do that, including in the Volkswagen contract. So in the transparency that's required when you're spending a record amount of subsidy for foreign multinational companies, the best way to ensure that is to release the contracts. And that's why we've got this motion here before us, to please release the documents. And I know what's not in the Volkswagen contract is an ability or a clause that allows the government to keep that contract quiet. It's not there. It's not the government's right. So I know we're going to hear a lot from opposition members about commercial sensitivity and all of that, but the companies themselves have the ability to exempt the few clauses that may be commercially sensitive. But most of what's in these contracts, you can read elements of the battery subsidy in the IRA, you can read the commitments maybe on jobs, maybe not on jobs, but there's clearly a confusion in the government and between the companies as to how many taxpayer-funded foreign replacement workers are coming in and how many jobs will actually go to good unionized jobs. We have an unemployment rate in Windsor of 7%. The governments have invested and are ready for the training. We did this in Halifax with a shipbuilding contract, with a $30 billion shipbuilding contract, the community college, the industry, everyone. All that training was done in Canada for Canadian workers. And that's what everyone expected with these contracts. So it's shocking that the Liberal government seems to be hiding their incompetence in these contracts, and this is the reason we've put it forward. Canadians deserve to know how their money is being spent, and if it's being spent for jobs for replacement workers from outside of Canada, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Mr. Perkins. I see as well, Mr. Johns and Mr. Kuzmierczuk, you have your hands up. I've added you to the speaking order. Mr. Berthold, go ahead, please. Welcome to OGGO.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. $50 billion of public money, that's $3,000 provided by each Canadian household in grants for these EV battery. Imagine what every family in Canada could do with $3,000. Well, the government chose to send $3,000 from each household to create these jobs. Unfortunately, what we've been learning over the past few weeks is that, unfortunately, this money will not be used only to create Canadian jobs in these locations. What we found out is that in Windsor, there will be foreign replacement workers that will be funded by money coming from Canadian and Quebec households. Now, at first we were told this was disinformation, it wasn't true, and then the Liberals changed their story saying that there would be some foreign workers to provide advice. But now we have the confirmation from the company itself saying that they are going to hire at least 900 foreign workers that will be paid for with taxpayer money and work in the Windsor plant. So, of course, that raises questions about what's going to happen at Northvolt. There will be 2 Northvolt factories in Quebec. Following questions that were asked after the reports in the media, we found out that Northvolt is going to bring in hundreds of foreign workers that are funded by taxpayer money. These jobs should have been for Canadians. And they are getting a huge amount of Canadian taxpayer money for that. So we know that in Stellantis, they will have foreign workers. We know it's the case for Northvolt also. And we can guess that if the other contracts follow suit, they will also have taxpayer-funded foreign workers. And so we support the motion to obtain the contracts. This is unheard of. $50 billion, $3,000 per household of hard-earned money is going to be given to these companies in the hopes of creating Canadian jobs. And now we've found out that's not what's going to happen. So for all of those reasons, Mr. Chair, it's important for these contracts to be made public. We want to know if the government took steps to protect this funding and make sure that it creates Canadian unionized jobs for Canadians, paid for by Canadians. It's essential. The Liberals today will say, look, it's a contract. We can't disclose all of the information. It will complicate future negotiations with other companies, and it will make it harder to attract foreign investments in Canada. But, Mr. Chair, we're talking about Canadians' money. We're talking about $50 billion, $3,000 per family. Canadians have a right to know what kinds of contracts this government is signing with private corporations, and we have a right to know what they're doing with the money. And so we need to get all of the contracts. Canadians have a right to see them, and we have a right to see how well this government tried to protect Canadian jobs. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
We're told, Mr. Lewis, please. I see you as well, Ms. Vignola.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the committee for allowing me to come to committee this morning. Obviously, incredibly near and dear to my heart and incredibly concerning, Mr. Chair, because this is my own backyard. So I represent an excellent riding called Essex, and that butts right up to Windsor, where the Stellantis plant's going to be. You know, there's one good thing about Air Canada being late, and that's that we get more time to spend on our phones with folks. At least I do. And last night I spoke to the IBEW, International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. I also spoke with the Carpenters Union. And they said nothing less than these are jobs that are going to be stolen from the very fingertips of Canadians. So now we've got $50 billion potentially on the laps of each and every one of us around this table that is basically unaccounted for. And we need to understand, we need to know exactly what the numbers are. This is only about, Mr. Chair, this is only about good paying, skilled trades jobs, both unionized and non-unionized jobs. That's what it's about. I was told last night that, yes, there's a few folks that need to come in for the programming of the computers. But the rest of this work, Chair, has already been duplicated time and time and time again in other portions of the automotive industry. An industry, Mr. Chair, that's been absolutely decimated due to COVID. Absolutely decimated. An industry that that drives southwestern Ontario, not only in Windsor, but certainly in Windsor. An industry that works very closely with our counterparts in Michigan and downriver Michigan. So to suggest for a moment that we don't open the books on this and really find out how many folks are coming here to take away good paying Canadian jobs, that's the question. And anything shy of that answer is not doing justice to our skilled trade jobs. And when I reflect back on it, it's not only the battery plant itself; it's the tier 2s and the tier 3s that are going to be affected. The same ones that have already been affected, that couldn't get folks across the border on the shop floors, but they had to put all the investment into this new material, this new technology to play the game. And so they deserve it. They deserve the answers. The workers deserve the answers. The unions deserve the answers. And the folks of Essex Windsor deserve the answers. So, Mr. Chair, I think it would be the world's biggest mistake if we did not look at $50 billion investment into this. And, I'll take it one last step, Mr. Chair. It's as simple as this. It's each and every family, every Canadian family that are trying to feed the mouths of their children, right? So if it's $1,000 a family or it's $3,000 a family, whatever the number is, they deserve to know as well. So I would strongly ask that this committee certainly take a really hard look at this and take a hard look in the mirror, because you're affecting just a whole bunch of people's lives and a whole bunch of businesses. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Mr. Lewis. Mr. Scheer, and then we'll go to Mr. Johns.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. This is a very important motion because Canadians deserve answers as to where their tax dollars going. The Prime Minister decided to give $15 billion to a large multinational company to set up shop here in Canada. He, in essence, made every single Canadian a shareholder in this project, to the tune of, in this case of Stellantis, $1,000 per household. If you lump them all in together, that number goes up to about $3,000 per household. So we're going to hear arguments, I suspect, and we've seen them in the media over the last few days from Liberals saying, well, we can't divulge the details of the contract because of commercial sensitivities. Well, shareholders can absolutely demand to see documents when their company does something, when their CEOs make decisions. They are held accountable by their shareholders. In this case, we are the representatives, as members of Parliament, of the shareholders of this country. Foreign replacement workers coming to Canada, thanks to taxpayer subsidies, is of interest to not just the workers in the area, but every single Canadian family whose tax bill is underwriting this. And let's talk about workers in the area. We've heard from union representatives that there are qualified Canadians that can do this work. The Windsor area, in the case of Stellantis, is home to hundreds, if not thousands, of qualified Canadian workers who have worked in the auto sector, in some cases for their entire lives, in some cases for multiple generations. And the idea that there's no one in Canada that can fill these jobs is an insult to those hardworking men and women who have built those communities and worked in that industry for decades in some cases. So that's what this motion is all about. If this is such a good deal for Canadian taxpayers and such a good deal for Canadian workers, the government should want to make the details of the contract public. If they have a different story to tell as to the number of foreign workers that will be paid for out of this contract, let them come to committee. Let them explain it. All we're asking for here is for that famous prescription about sunlight being the best disinfectant. And we want to bring the details of this contract out of the darkness and into the light. And this is something that the government has touted, as my colleague, Mr. Perkins, outlined. Even though it seems like the minister doesn't know what's in the contract, didn't stop him from going around for weeks and months talking about its benefits. So if that's the case, now that these reports are out there, it's incumbent upon us to scrutinize that and to determine whether or not there are this is as good a deal as the government pretended it would be. Billions of dollars going to multinational corporations to build a single plant in Canada, and then to use those taxpayer dollars to underwrite foreign replacement workers is very concerning. And if this is the way that the government is going to conduct itself, in terms of an industrial strategy or a job creation strategy, then absolutely Canadians have a right to know. I'm looking at the numbers for the Stellantis deal itself, and the reports indicate that up to 1,600 of these jobs will be filled by taxpayer-funded foreign replacement workers. That's out of 2,500 direct jobs from the plant. I mean, that's 1,600 out of 2,500. That's not a very good ratio if you're talking about the percentage of tax dollars going to create jobs for Canadians versus jobs for foreign replacement workers. That's a terrible ratio. So we need to get to the bottom of that for those reasons. It's our job to hold the government to account when it spends tax dollars. It's our job to scrutinize the details on behalf of the shareholders of this country, every single Canadian taxpayer, every single Canadian citizen. And I do hope the Liberals will agree to this motion, because all it is about getting the documents in front of this committee so we can do the job that Canadians send us here to do, which is defend their interest, defend their tax dollars, and make sure they're getting the very best possible deal.
Thanks, Mr. Scheer. We're going to go to Mr. Johns, then Mr. Kuzmierczak.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I wish I was there in person, but my flight got canceled last night due to fog from Vancouver Island, and thankfully, Dana Dow's, the chief shop steward from BC Ferries, loaned me his tie so I could be here. I know in all seriousness, we want transparency and we want to avoid future problems, which is why we're supporting this motion today. And I just want to raise a few points as well. You know, the government investment in the auto industry has long-standing strategy in Canada and the US and around the world, and it's benefited the Canadian economy and has built the middle class in this country over many decades. The workers and the unions are the ones responsible for sustaining the industry and creating the opportunities through decades of negotiations and getting the industry to transform for the next technological change to electrical vehicles. And it's really a once in a lifetime, a multi-generational situation. And this government has had to meet the challenges the US government created through the Inflation Reduction Act auto provisions. And while doing so, they have fallen short on the disclosure and transparency that exist in the US government's plan, which is why we're supporting this motion. And a national auto strategy, something the NDP has called for 2 decades, would have provided that transparency and accountability this government has decided to ignore. So over the past 2 weeks, from a revelation from the South Korean ambassador that 1,600 foreign workers from South Korea were coming to help build and operate the plant, there have been many questions that this government has refused to answer. From last Monday, the government said it was 1 job. Then on Tuesday, 100 jobs. Then on Thursday, it was 900 jobs, etc. The confusion has damaged public trust and sowed division among the various unions and in communities. This is a failure of leadership, and it needs to be corrected. It's what we're working on today, hopefully. And these investments in our auto sector are very important. They'll be transformative for the industry, create many new jobs for Canadians, and accordingly, this must have public support. So to do that, the public needs all the information on these investments and facilities across this country. And so this is an opportunity for the government to rebuild that public trust by demonstrating how these investments will create jobs for Canadians, new training opportunities, employ our brightest engineers, scientists, and world-leading skilled auto workers, along with our highly skilled building trades professionals. So full disclosure means also outlining how many foreign workers from countries such as South Korea, Sweden, Germany, and other countries will be coming here, what jobs, tasks, and training they will be carrying out, and for how long. This will ensure the public has a full knowledge and understanding of the facts. And once the public has all the facts, they will support these investments and public trust will be rebuilt. That's the hope. That's what we want, ultimately. I know that the Building Trades Union is still concerned. During all the public announcements, ribbon cutting, and victory laps, neither the federal liberals or the provincial conservatives have identified that hundreds or thousands of workers would be coming. So we just want to make sure that, all references that, we build a battery plant, train and become experts are going to be done here. And a few important things. This gives us an opportunity to understand, and it can be demonstrated that if we are short some skills, which we don't believe, that starting with this first project, let's learn to train our workers who are already used to traveling to different provinces to do that work. Every community right now is struggling with housing at the moment. Why are we not using this as an opportunity to plan and create permanent housing as well? So the real fight here is for the initial build, and let's get it going. And we, the New Democrats, we have confidence the public supports clean energy jobs, transitioning the economy and being competitive. But our difference is accountability through an auto policy so people appreciate and support the value of our partnerships. And these investments need to be for workers, their families, not CEOs or shareholders as the primary beneficiary. Now, one concern I have that I wanted to highlight in the motion is that it's drawing the report to come back to the House. I don't believe that that's necessary at this point. I think it would be something that, we order the documents from our committee, and we can do that without going to the House. Normally, it would just be reported to the House and then turn into an order from the House if a committee request is ignored or broken. So I think that I would like to amend anything that refers it to the House and move that amendment, that motion, that direction to report it back to to OGGO. So I'd like to move an amendment to the motion, and hopefully I can gain support from that from my colleagues.
Okay, just to strip that one line about reporting it to the House, Mr. Johns?
That's it, just reporting it back to the committee.
Okay. Mr. Genuis on the amendment?
Thank you, Chair. Conservatives are here pushing for transparency with regard to the expenditure of taxpayers' dollars, and we certainly do not support the idea that an important safeguard like reporting this matter to the House should be stripped from the motion. This is the mechanism for ensuring that the government follows through. We've had many instances where committees have ordered the production of documents, and the government has flagrantly ignored the right of committees to order the production of documents. Committees have an important job to do, but we've seen consistently that this government does not respect the work that committees have to do ordering documents. We want transparency. We believe taxpayers have a right to see all of the details of this contract, and the motion that we have drafted provides the safeguards to ensure that that will actually happen. The amendment that's been proposed by the NDP would, I think, substantively allow the government to do what they have done in many other cases, that is, to simply ignore the order to produce the committee. So the question before this committee is are we committed to ordering these documents, and are we serious about ensuring that we actually get them? And if we're serious about ensuring we actually get them, as Conservatives are, then it is important that we have this mechanism of reporting it to the House as well.
Mr. Johns, Ms. Vignola, Mr. Kuzmierczak, do you mind putting your hands down because we're debating the amendment? I do have you on the speaking list. If you wish to chime in on Mr. Johns' amendment, leave your hands up. We'll go back to Mr. Johns.
Yeah, I agree with Mr. Genius. Like we want the answers, and I think that here's where I would like to go, is that we order the documents to be submitted to the committee, and if they don't, then we can go and talk about going to more the nuclear option to the House. But I don't believe that's necessary right now. I think we need to take a look at them at our committee and decide whether that's something we want to do.
Before I go to Mr. Scheer, Mr. Kuzmierczak and Ms. Vignola, okay. Mr. Kuzmierczak, you still have your hands up. Is that for speaking on Mr. Johns?
For the amendment,
okay.
And then I'd also like to speak to the motion.
Yeah, I have you on the list. So we'll Mr. Kuzmierczak, then Mr. Scheer for the amendment.
No, I just wanted to say that we do approve the NDP amendment. We will be supporting the NDP amendment.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Scheer.
Not shocked at that. I just want to reinforce a point that my colleague, Mr. Jones, said. This is about protecting the interests of taxpayers and safeguarding their hard-earned money. The idea that it's somehow the nuclear option to report this to the House, I just utterly reject that. It's procedurally what that would mean is that the House would be advised, should the government fail to abide by this duly constituted, properly passed motion in the event that the committee adopts it, there needs to be a what if. You know, if the government looks at this motion and says, okay, well, the committee's asked for something and we can just ignore it, well, then they will. They've done that in the past. The reporting mechanism is very straightforward. It would just inform the House that an order of the committee is being ignored. It would then be up to the House as to whether or not to adopt and concur in that report, at which point the powers of Parliament kick in. And that's really the crux of this matter. In order for the government to be forced to do something, it needs to be elevated to that level. Otherwise, you know, we would have to, if we adopt this amendment, what the NDP member is suggesting is that this committee then would have to become seized with this issue again. Whereas the genius behind this motion is that it gets it all done in one step. It orders the production and includes a mechanism that if the will of the committee is not respected by the government, that there's then an enforcement mechanism to compel them to do so. Otherwise, this would just be kind of an expression of opinion with no actual follow-up. And the reason why that's important is because it's not like Parliament is somehow just a backdrop for the Prime Minister. It's not just a set in which he plays his role. We're not extras in his movie or in his productions. We have a constitutional duty to hold the government to account. That's the purpose. That's why we're all here. We're not here, just to enjoy the November weather in Ottawa. We're here to do a job. We're here to pour through the books, bring out the magnifying glasses, and go through every detail. And that is our role. So this isn't just wanting to get a few exchanges of emails from somebody. These are multi-billion-dollar contracts that the government seems to have failed to ensure protection for Canadian workers. It's hard to think, other than national security issues, it's hard to think of other types of issues that would rise to the level of importance for parliamentarians. Pouring through the books to identify how tax dollars is being spent and the impact on Canadian workers is, top 2 or 3 jobs that members of Parliament could even think of having to do throughout the parliamentary day. So I don't see why. I don't see the problem in reporting it back to the House. In fact, I see the problem if we don't do that, because then we'll likely be back here in a few weeks. Let's just take that off the table. Let's just think of every possible scenario to get a one-stop shopping type of motion to ensure not only do we pass this motion compelling documents, but there's actually an enforcement mechanism to ensure the government respects the democratic will of this committee.
Chair, just a point of order. I wonder if Mr. Johns can clarify. I understand him to have moved an amendment, so I want to clarify. My understanding, just looking at the motion, would be that his amendment proposes to remove Section G. Is the amendment to remove Section G, or is it something else, just so we know what's on the table?
Mr. Johns, do you want to just confirm what, or answer Mr. Garnett, just to confirm? It's removing G?
It is just to remove the word wherever it's stated to the House with committee. That's it in the motion. So in G, it's actually all it would be doing in G is report present a report to the committee. And if I could, when I get a chance, I'd like to speak to respond to my colleague Mr. Scheer's comments.
Oh, okay, so we just need to know what we're debating. So it is to replace the word House with the word committee in G. That's the amendment. Okay, thank you.
It's Mr. Sousa, then back to you, Mr. Johns, and then over to Mr. Genuis. Go ahead, Mr. Sousa.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair.
On the amendment?
Yeah, on the amendment, I'm a little shocked, actually, that we have an opportunity here to continue to enable foreign direct investment. These are confidential matters. The members opposite appreciate that, and I appreciate the members' desire to review the contracts and determine.
I'm going to interrupt you, Mr. Sousa, on the amendment we're discussing.
I understand, and this is why it's important that we maintain the confidentiality of these contracts in enabling us to continue to attract these investments. So for us to provide and then expose it to others, it puts at risk and jeopardize the very existence of the enablement of these investments coming to Canada. So I would ask us not to make this to the House as a result, but allow the members the opportunity to review it.
Mr. Johns?
Well, first of all, I can't imagine if we start doing this at this committee, ordering all documents directly to the House and how that would play out. But we're starting from a position, if we send it directly to the House, that we're just stating that the requests that we'd make at OGGO would be ignored. So I don't know why we're assuming this. And, going through the House can also be slower. I mean, the committee can order the documents today. Kicking it to the House means a report to the House maybe later this week, a debate on it, at some point later next week or whoever, whenever. I think this is a starting point, and getting the documents to the committee would be normal procedure. And if we don't have positive results, then I'm happy to entertain the conversation of taking it to the next level. But I think that from a procedural standpoint, I think if we start doing this with our committee, this is going to, be a big problem for us. And I guess it's undermining as well. It's just bad faith to start with. And I don't believe that. I think that we need to start from the position that the request needs to be honored. And that's where I want to start with on this.
Thanks, Mr. Johns. Mr. Genuis, then Mr. Housefather and Ms. Vignola.
I think I see where this is going.
Mr. Housefather, on the amendment?
Yes, Mr. Chair. I think I'd like some clarification as well, because I think this is a bit confusing. So paragraph G is that the chair be instructed to present a report to the House, and it's clear that Mr. Johns is suggesting that this be changed. I don't know that you would need to present a report to the committee because the committee is aware that this would be adopted. I think that the right intention would be to just remove G, but I leave that to Mr. Johns. Then there's H, which also refers to the same thing. It talks about what would happen in the event that the documents were not produced as ordered by the committee. And then it also states that then this would go to the House. And it sounds to me, I think, from Mr. Johns that he would like to reconsider this in the event that it is not done and not have it in this motion right now. So I think that there's also the amendment that Mr. Johns proposed would also have to deal with paragraph H in this. So perhaps I just asked my colleague, Mr. Johns, to reread paragraphs G and H and just to provide some clarity as to what the amendment would do, because it would make no sense to me that we wouldn't also be amending H, because I think he was globally amending it to remove references to the House at this stage, because we're not supposed to presume that the documents won't come as the committee requested. But I leave that again to Mr. Johns to clarify again. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Do you want to just take a stab at clarifying that, and then we'll go to Ms. Vignola, then Mr. Genuis? Mr. Johns?
So if it makes more sense, and I think Mr. Genuis has raised this as well, that we remove G because it won't be necessary. And looking at H, I think that we could look at, I would be open
sorry,
to...
Mr. Johns, we can't change your sub-amendment, but I think Mr. Housefather was looking for clarification from you, what you were trying to do originally.
Yeah, I think that what I was trying to do is get the documents produced and reported back to the committee. And then I was hoping that we would have a conversation from there. And I'm open to a friendly amendment by Mr. Housefather on H.
Friendly amendment to the sub-amendment, but we're going to go to Ms. Vignola and then Mr. Genuis.
Merci beaucoup,
On the
Monsieur le Président.
on the original amendment, please.
OK, j'ai manqué un petit bout.
Okay. I missed a little section there. I'm going to speak about the motion. What I understood is that if we move this motion, then any member of the committee could table the information in the House and then have a 3-hour debate. However, it wouldn't stop us as the committee from receiving the documents and studying them. Am I mistaken in my understanding of the original motion? We're asking for the tabling of a report saying that we received the document, which could lead to 3 hours of debate. Is that correct?
Quelqu'un.
Anyone?
Can you repeat that? I'm having trouble with the translation. Just the question, please.
Si je comprends bien.
if I understand correctly, looking at the original motion as it existed before Mr. John's amendment, any member of the committee could bring the report to the House for a 3-hour debate. Is that correct?
J'ai pas d'interprétation.
No, and I'm going to just step in here. I'm going to step back because Mr. John seems to have been adjusted as we go. Looking back on the original, what I can see from the original was to remove the words, not G, removing G and H, removing the part where Chair shall be instructed to present as soon as possible further report to the House recommending that in order the House do issue for the foregoing documents. But I think that is what Mr. Johns was intending, or what Mr. Johns was. Yeah, I'll get you. Sorry.
Est-ce que je pourrais avoir une
Colleagues, I'm going to
copie
suspend
de
for
la
2
motion?
seconds. I'm going to suspend for 2 seconds. We're going to go back and check the transcript and double check and just confirm, because now we're just, as again, we end up with sub-amendments of sub-amendments of sub-amendments of things that were apparently never intended to begin with. So just suspend for 2 seconds here, colleagues. Wish to go ahead briefly?
Yeah, I'm going to withdraw.
Great. So we're going to withdraw. We just need consent for Mr. Johns to withdraw that. I see that consent. Thanks. We're going to go back to the original speaking order now that the amendment has been withdrawn. And so we are with Mr. Kusmirchuk. So we're back on the original debate. Go ahead, Mr. Kusmirchuk.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Actually, can I ask for a brief suspension? Can you give us just 1 quick minute, Mr. Chair?
For what purpose, please?
I just need to clarify our direction here moving forward. So just a quick suspension. 1 minute.
Point of order, direction from who?
Yeah, I'm not going to suspend for that. We've got quite a.
I just need a clarification on what just transpired.
Mr. I can clarify for you, Mr. As I will repeat, Mr. Johns has withdrawn his. No, we're not going to. Mr. Johns has withdrawn his amendment. Now we're back to the original speaking order on the motion.
Okay.
So
sure.
Please just go ahead on
Happy
that.
to do that.
Thanks.
Well, Mr. Chair, as a Windsorite, this is the most important investment in the history of our community. And so it is important that when we talk about it, that we talk about this investment in facts, not in political games, not in what we're seeing, false information and confusion that is being sown by the Conservative Party, by Conservative members. This is not the place to play politics with people's livelihood. And with this investment, that is the most important investment in the history of my community. A little bit of context. 8 years ago, my community of Windsor had an unemployment rate of 11.2% under the Conservative government. The current present leader of the Conservative opposition was the Minister of Employment. Might as well have been the Minister of Unemployment for manufacturing communities like mine that had 11.2% unemployment, 11.2% unemployment in my community. And so this investment, this battery plant, is the single most important investment in the history of my community. And it is important that when members of parliament talk about it, they speak in facts. And I want to put forward some of those facts. I spoke last week with the current president of Unifor Local 444, Dave Cassidy. And I also had a chance to speak this weekend with the CEO of the Nexstar battery plant. And here are the facts. There will be 2,500 full-time jobs building batteries, building 2 million batteries every year at that battery plant, the Stellantis battery plant. Those workers will be local, they will be Canadian, and they will be unionized. There are 900 workers currently building the battery plant. And when all is said and done, there will be 2,300 workers building the battery plant as we speak. And I got a chance to tour it. And those workers are all local, they're all Canadian. And don't take my word for it. This is what Dave Cassidy, who is the president of Unifor Local 444, this is the person who represents all the Stellantis workers at Windsor Assembly Plant. And this is the president of Unifor Local 444 that will represent the 2,500 workers, permanent workers at the battery plant. This is what Dave Cassidy says. We are going to have 2,500 Unifor 444 workers building batteries in that facility. And they will be building those facilities for generations to come. This is what else he says. There will be Koreans are going to come over and they are going to assist in the building of the proprietary equipment that will go into that building. And that is nothing new. And what he means by that is that anyone who has ever set foot in a factory, in a manufacturing factory, knows that installing machinery and equipment, that when you install machinery or equipment from abroad, the companies from abroad send their workers to help install that machinery and equipment because they have the know-how. They built it, they have the know-how, and they have the proprietary information. That the equipment is proprietary. It's the same way as in Windsor. When you have local companies like Centerline, like Valiant, Windsor companies, when they install equipment, whether it's in Alabama, whether it's in Germany, whether it's in Japan, they will fly Windsor workers to install the equipment, to test the equipment, to debug the equipment. It is part of the contract. They are contractually obligated to do so, to maintain the warranty of that equipment. Dave Cassidy goes on to say, this is nothing but political hay. This is a circus, is what Dave Cassidy says. the misinformation that are being shared with the committee and with Canadians. And Dave Cassidy goes on to say, if Pierre Poilievre had his way, this battery plant wouldn't even be built. Wouldn't even be built. The president of Unifor Canada, Lana Payne, published an article this weekend with the headline, Canadians deserve better than misinformed battery plant debate. This is the president of Unifor, the largest private sector union in Canada, representing hundreds of thousands of workers, including automotive workers at Stellantis, at Ford. And this is what Lana Payne writes. Anyone who knows anything about the startup of major industrial projects knows that it takes a lot of different people in many different jobs to pull these things together. But that didn't stop the information mill from working overtime, referring to the conservative misinformation mill. And Ms. Payne, president of Unifor, goes on to say, conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, the ringleader of this media circus, went so far as to call for a national inquiry into the matter. And she goes on to say, Lana Payne, the president of Unifor, for one thing, there is nothing new about Canadian firms leaning on foreign professionals when launching new industrial projects. Anyone who has spent half a second studying the auto industry knows there isn't a single mass-scale battery cell production facility operating in Canada. This is the reason Stellantis opted for a venture with LG Energy in the first place, to tap into this technical expertise. This is no different than what happens during a new vehicle product launch. In fact, teams of U.S. workers were temporarily brought over the border to help get the GM Ingersoll plant up and running and building new EV delivery vans. This plant also received substantial government investment. No one batted an eye. And she goes on to say, this is again the president of Unifor, Lana Payne, goes on to say, it's embarrassing, quite frankly, the tenor of political debate on this issue. And this is the important part to me and to every resident of Windsor. And it's doing a disservice to all of us who have been scratching and clawing to rebuild the auto industry into the powerhouse it once was. No thanks to harmful conservative trade policy or economic ideology. No one has more at stake in this matter than Canadian auto workers. These are the Canadian auto workers that Unifor represents. I don't understand, quite frankly, I don't understand why the MPs, opposition MPs are on this table, ignore what the president of Unifor says. The president of Unifor is saying, I don't understand why the opposition members around this table are ignoring what David Cassidy says. Dave Cassidy, who is the president of local Unifor 444 in Windsor, representing thousands of auto workers at Stellantis in Windsor, the Windsor Assembly Plant, and that will be representing to 2,500 workers that will be permanently building the battery plant in Windsor. And I don't understand it. I don't understand it. Our message, of course, when I met with Nexstar, of course, is to say that...
Point of order, Chair, on relevance.
Go ahead. Continue, Mr. Kuzmierczuk.
No, I appreciate that very much.
But I would ask that you, there is as much repetition as relevance. I'd appreciate if we could just get back to the point of the motion.
I think, Mr. Chair, you can appreciate how important this debate is to me and to my community in Windsor-Tecumseh. And the truth of the matter is, the reason why we're here, the success of electric vehicles and the success of EV battery plants is a direct threat to conservatives, a direct threat. They don't believe in climate change. Conservatives don't believe in electric vehicles. They never supported, from day one, they never supported the Stellantis battery
Sorry,
plant.
Mr. Kuzmierczuk. Yeah, I would ask that we stay away from the more insulting stuff and just stick to the motion, please, Mr. Kuzmierczak?
Mr. Chair, it's not insulting. This is the truth.
Mr.
This is the
Kuzmierczak,
truth.
I'm going to interrupt you again. Could you please just stick to the motion? Go ahead, sir.
And so the truth of the matter is, the battery plant demonstrates that when you have an environmental policy, you have an economic policy, and you have jobs. And that's what the battery plant represents. And again, the facts, 2,500 full-time Canadian local workers building battery plants for generations. 2,300 construction workers building the battery plant. Local Canadian workers. And yes, we are partnering with our Korean partners at LG to install the machinery and the equipment. There will be 900 Korean workers that will come in and help us share their knowledge and install the machinery and equipment and get it up and running as soon as possible. But there will be 700 Canadian trades helping with that installation at its peak. We know that. Those are the facts. That's been known for months. And that's the fact. Those are the facts. We are partnering with our Korean partners because we've never built a battery plant in Canada before. We are starting an industry from absolute scratch. We don't have the expertise. And so we are leaning on our partners in Korea, LG, because they are the world leaders. They have been building batteries for 30 years. They have over 24,000 patents on the construction of batteries. They are the experts. And they are coming here to help us get the battery plant up and running as quickly as possible and to share their knowledge and expertise with us. And they are temporary and they will leave. And what will remain are 2,500 Canadian local workers building batteries. And so, Mr. Chair, I do have an amendment that I would like to put forward to this motion. But I wanted to emphasize, again, this is the most important investment in the history of my community. And this is why, again, I ask and I beseech my colleagues around the table to speak with facts about it, to keep the politics and the games and the misinformation out of it. And I do have a motion.
Are you reading it in, Mr. Kuzmierczak?
I have an amendment, pardon me, to the motion.
Go ahead, please. Because you're not in person, the clerk's going to jot it down, so don't go too fast. But please start, Mr. Kuzmierczak.
So I would like to start by striking G and H from the original motion.
Is that you said start? Is there more?
Yes, there is.
Okay, so we have that. Go ahead.
Unless we can vote on that first and then actually vote on a subsequent sub-amendment as well, too. So I will just put that amendment forward. That amendment forward, please.
Okay, we'll start a speaking list on that amendment. Mr. Genuis.
Thank you, Chair.
Sorry, Ms. Vignola, I see your hand up. Is that for the amendment or is that for?
C'était sur la motion.
This was about the original motion and the amendment that was put forward by Gord Johns. So I have the same comment as before.
Mr. Johns has withdrawn his, but you're on the speaking order of the original amendment after Mr. Kuzmierczak. Go ahead, Mr. Genuis.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Kuzmierczak said he would start with an amendment to strike Section G and H. I suppose his next proposed amendment will be to strike Sections A through F, which will achieve the objective he has made clear that he wants, which is he does not want taxpayers to be able to see what's in this contract if he takes matters seriously, as he purports to. I think he would take seriously the role of taxpayers in looking at these documents. That said, Chair, look, Conservatives put forward this motion. We believe the motion is good as is and should be supported as is. I do think it's important to make a distinction between G and H. G is to provide an immediate report to the House on these matters, which is something we think is worthwhile. And H is to say that in the event the documents are not produced, that there would be a follow-up from the committee. These are, in our view, both important, but H is substantially more important because H provides a safety valve if the government doesn't provide the documents. By proposing to remove G and H, Mr. Kuzmierczak has made clear that the government's intention is to not provide these documents even if the committee orders them, because he doesn't want there to be any safety valve. I think it was evident in his comments that he doesn't think these documents should be provided, and he has proposed the removal of any kind of safety valve mechanism that would allow that. I want to propose a sub-amendment that is to undelete H, which I think, though not rendering it perfect, substantially improves the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Genwas. We'll start a speaking list on the sub-amendment to the amendment. Mr. Kuzmierczak, did you want to respond?
No, not at all. My sub-amendment is quite clear, and I'm not sure why Mr. Genuis wants to waste the committee's time.
Okay. Mr. Johns, go ahead. Oh, no, we got Mr. Johns. On the sub-amendment to the amendment, Mr. Johns?
I just don't think it, yeah, I'm fine with removing H. I mean, the safety valve is that the committee orders something and that if it isn't complied with, the committee gets to decide what to do about next. So I support removing H. And if we don't get the documents, and I'm worried about 1 week because of translation. I think 2 weeks would make sure we get the documents. I want to get the documents. And if we don't get the documents, then we can look at, next steps. But I think ordering the documents to the committee would be the first step. And so I'll support this.
You're supporting Mr. Genuis's, or are you referring to the original amendment?
The original.
Thank you.
I don't think we need to leave H in.
We're on the
a little early for that.
Okay, we're on the sub amendment. Mr. Genuis, go ahead, please.
Yeah. Okay. So this is a little bit disappointing, and I think it's important to just make the case very clearly. Liberals have said that they do not believe that they should provide these documents, which is mind-boggling but typical of this government, that they don't believe that they owe taxpayers an explanation of how taxpayers' money is being spent. And I would hope that we would have had some agreement from the opposition that these documents should be provided. The removal of G and H, as proposed by the Liberals, has the effect of removing the mechanism by which the committee can actually substantively follow up and insist that these documents come. Without those provisions in there, we know what's going to happen. The documents are not going to be provided, as was made effectively clear by Mr. Kuzmierczak's comments. And then when they're not provided, the most we can do is propose another motion, which likely Liberals will insert additional roadblocks to, and they'll try to lean on their coalition partners again to prevent this from moving forward. So H provides the mechanism by which this committee can ensure those documents come. Liberals don't want H to be in there because they don't want the documents to be provided. They don't plan to provide the documents. We've put H in there because we believe the documents should be provided, and we need a mechanism to ensure that those documents will be provided. So if the opposition parties actually want these documents to be provided, that we need H in there. And if they don't want these documents provided, if other opposition parties want to go along with the Liberals in covering up these documents, then they'll support Mr. Kuzmierczuk's amendment. Now we're very much interested in working with others on this. If 2 weeks is preferable to 1 week, up to 2 weeks, sure, we can support that change. But the removal of H will have the effect of allowing the government to do what they have clearly indicated they intend to do, which is to prevent these documents from coming to light. We Conservatives will insist these documents do come to light, and I hope we will have the support of other parties in ensuring that the mechanism is in this motion to follow up if the documents are not provided. And I'll end there.
Ms. Ognola, your hand is up. Is it on the sub-amendment that we're discussing right now? Mr. Garnett's sub-amendment? Please go ahead.
Donc, personnellement, merci.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Personally, I would keep G and H. And it would be nice to be included in the discussion. I would keep G and H to have a safety net. I don't believe, in my humble opinion, that discussing this for 3 hours in the House will not be a waste of time. If I understood correctly, we were told that there's a need for specialized workers from abroad. Yes, other companies do that. That's fine. However, I've never heard of any Canadian company sending 1,600 workers abroad. That's never happened. So I'd like to shed some light on that. We're talking about billions of dollars, 10 years before it's profitable.
Can I interrupt for a moment?
Je garde H, mais je garde G.
Yeah.
Merci.
Perfect. You are next on the speaking order when we get back to the motion after this. So we're done with speakers. Mr. Garnett's sub-amendment was to delete the deletion of H. So we'll go right to a vote on that. Mr. Kuzmierczuk's amendment was to delete G and H. Mr. Genuis's was to change that to just delete G. Are we clear on what we're voting on? We'll go to a vote. We'll do a recorded vote, I assume. Thank you.
The vote is on the sub-amendment. Mr. Baines?
No.
Mr. May?
No.
Mr. Kuzmierczuk?
No.
Mr. Souza?
No.
Ms. Gainey?
No.
Mr. Jenis?
Yes.
Mr. Berthold?
Oui.
Mr. Perkins?
Yes.
Madame Vignola?
Oui.
Mr. Johns?
No.
That is 4 yeas, 6 nays.
The sub-amendment is... She voted. So the sub-amendment is defeated. We will now go to the original amendment, which is Mr. Kuzmierczuk's, which is to delete G and H. We'll go to a recorded vote. Oh, I apologize. We'll restart our speaking order for the amendment. I apologize. We left it with the Got to Mr. Generous with a sub-amendment. So I don't have a speaking list, but I see Mr. Scheer. So we'll start with Mr. Scheer.
Yeah, I just want to just make sure that we're clear on a few things. I know there's some conversation about the issue itself that we've outlined, but listening to my colleague from the NDP, I just want to clarify that because he's used the expression a few times that these documents don't need to go to the House; they can just stay here at committee. Just to be crystal clear, that is what this motion calls for the committee to receive these documents, not for these documents to be tabled to the House or delivered to the House. All that would go to the House, as this motion is written, is kind of one thing for sure and one thing if necessary. The thing that for sure would happen if this motion is adopted is that the chair will present a report to the House, just notifying the House that this motion has been adopted. So it's just an FYI. It doesn't automatically come with a debate. It's just you would get up during routine proceedings and you would table the report. I don't see how that uses up House time or committee time. You've been in the House before when chairs table reports. It sometimes takes a few seconds. There's nothing that would automatically flow from that. So I don't see how G is a procedural problem for anybody. It's very innocuous. Their reports come from committees on a near daily basis. So that brings us to H. H says that in the event the documents have not been produced as ordered by the committee to the chair's satisfaction, the chair shall be instructed to present as soon as possible a further report to the House recommending that an order of the House do issue for the foregoing documents. And that is really the crux of this. That ensures that the government must comply. And again, Parliament is the body that holds the government to account. It's our job to shine a light on everything from how taxpayers' dollars are spent to what kinds of agreements were contained in this and whether or not, in fact, there were safeguards protecting Canadian jobs or not. So that is the step that's included here to save committee time, to anticipate a possibility that would be a contempt of the committee, and to, in one tidy motion, provide for a course of action in the event that the government ignores this motion. So if all goes well, if the government respects the democratic expression of this committee in terms of the adoption of this motion, we'll never need H. H will never come into play. The report to the House saying that the government has defied an order of the committee will never need to be made because they will have respected it. And in the event that they don't respect that, then I hope my NDP colleague would agree with us that would be an affront to this committee. It would be an affront to the principle of parliamentary accountability, and it would be an affront to the taxpayers who are paying for this and for the qualified Canadian workers who are being left out in the cold as taxpayer-funded foreign replacement workers fill the jobs that their tax dollars went to create in the first place. So I would just implore my NDP colleague not to think that somehow this motion should not be supported because it anticipates a potential problem and solves for it. Because in the event that this motion was ignored in the first place, I would hope that he would fight for his rights as a member to have committee decisions respected, and he would vote to support a version of H anyway. So let's just deal with this all at once. We've been talking about this for a little over an hour now. I know there's lots of business before this committee. There's lots of issues that we should be seized with. Let's take care of this one. Efficient. This is an ultra-efficient motion. It will save the committee time down the road. It will save the House time as well if the government ignores this. And if the government doesn't ignore this motion, then there's no problem and life can go on anyway.
Thank you, Mr. Scheer. Anyone else wish to speak on the amendment? Mr. Perkins?
I'll make one quick reference, just so everyone's up to speed on the translation issue, which is an important thing. The Volkswagen contract's already translated. It was translated in the spring when Industry Committee got a look at it. And the Stellantis contract if it's not already translated for signing, is on its way to being translated, and it will be done shortly, so, according to the government members.
Thanks. Can we move to the vote then, members? Oh, Mr. Johns, go ahead.
Yeah, so I mean, that just brings up a point actually that Mr. Perkins raised, and maybe he can help me with this. If this is already an industry, why is it coming to OGGO? Can someone maybe chime in from the Conservative bench?
We're actually on the two amendments, not what's going on in other committees. Can we address the amendments? Can we move to the vote on the amendments, Mr. Johns? Mr. Genuis on the amendment?
Okay. Yeah, so I think it's just important to underline kind of where we're at process-wise in terms of the amendment, because this is an amendment, this is a motion that Conservatives have put forward because an enormous amount of taxpayers' dollars is being spent in a process that involves replacement workers being brought in, and Conservatives are saying we need to see the contracts. Not just we as parliamentarians, but Canadians, the people we represent. We're here representing people that have elected us, that have a right to look at taxpayer, at how their hard-earned tax dollars are being spent. And what's been striking in the conversation at the committee up until now is that Liberals have been clear that that call for basic accountability is, in their eyes, political games. Right? The very existence of a parliamentary committee process, looking for accountability, looking for information and documents, is something that they consider a political game, and that's obviously just nonsense. It's the kind of nonsense we hear typically from Liberals. Is that anything that we, anytime we're trying to hold the government accountable, a government that's clearly struggling in popular support, anytime we want to hold them accountable and get information to the public, they diminish that as insignificant or unimportant. So we're saying we need to get these contracts. Now, the Liberal member, Mr. Kuzmierczak here, he made clear in his arguments that he doesn't think these documents should be provided. Mr. Sousa threw in that there's confidentiality involved and so forth. He doesn't believe Canadians should be seeing these contracts. So the Liberals have been clear about their position. Conservatives believe that these documents, Canadians should see these documents. Liberals believe that Canadians should not see these documents. And I think the Bloc are with us as well in saying that these documents should be seen. So the swing vote, in terms of the outcome of this, the swing vote is the NDP. And I think the position of the NDP, in light of what's happened, is either shifting or to put it charitably, is a bit unclear. Because after saying outright that they do not think the public should be able to see these documents, the Liberals then moved an amendment which dishonestly doesn't actually take the issue of production of documents. Okay, I'll withdraw the dishonestly part out of deference for you, Chair.
I'll just advise all around that let's just stick to the motion.
Thank you, Chair. I'll proceed. What they have done is to not actually directly engage the production issue. They have said, well, we're going to take out a couple of these additional sections, such that if the document and these two sections, G and H, they deal with the follow-up that would happen if the documents were not produced. If the documents are not produced, there has to be a process of follow-up, or else the government's just going to not produce the documents, which is their stated intention anyways. But rather than directly change the motion to remove the document production order, they have tried to change the motion to remove the enforcement mechanism, the necessary follow-up enforcement mechanism that would actually ensure these documents are provided. And we've heard some say, well, if the documents aren't provided, then we can consider what we're going to do at that point. Well, I say this committee has important work to do later. Let's put in the automatic follow-up mechanism. Else we know what's going to happen. We know that in a week or 2 weeks, based on what the government has said, they will not provide these documents, even if they're ordered to, if there's no enforcement mechanism. And then we'll have to bring it back to this committee at that point. And at that point, we'll see the same kind of efforts from the government side to tie this up. So this is why this amendment should not pass. It is quite evidently an attempt by the Liberals to undermine this whole effort. And I predict that if this amendment passes, they will not provide the documents. And then we'll be back here again, and Conservatives will be saying, I told you so. And then we'll have to repeat this whole discussion at that point. Hey, maybe I'll be surprised. Maybe they'll finally come through on something. But I suspect, and it's clear from what they're saying, that they do not intend to provide these documents unless we take the steps required to force them. Frankly, if they wanted to provide the documents, they would have already. We will continue to insist on the provision of the documents. Again, the Conservative position is clear. I think the Liberal position is clear. And now, if the other parties are serious about accessing these documents, we're open to identifying a reasoned compromise, but we need a mechanism to ensure that these documents will actually be provided. And I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Baines on the amendment.
Yes, just a lot's being said here. I just wanted to, mention that, Mr. Genovese saying that, we don't want to bring this information forward, and government and Liberal members don't want to bring this forward. And Mr. Perkins also mentioned already that these documents are available, translated and everything in another, which is being studied in another committee already. So just for the record, I wanted to make sure that that's being said, that the contract at the other committee requests a contract with Stellantis regarding Nexstar EV battery manufacturing facility in Windsor, Ontario, with job numbers unredacted in both official languages, that the contract be available at clerk's office for viewing by committee members for a minimum of 48 hours before the meeting, under the supervision of the clerk, and that no personal mobile, electronic, or recording devices of any kind be permitted in the room that week, and that no notes be taken out of the room to protect the security of this contract. And the committee meet with ISED officials in camera following the viewing of the contract, etc. And a number of members being invited to that community, including the ambassador of South Korea, the Minister of Innovation Science for 2 hours, Minister of Finance. So the information will come forward. So I think we should get on with what's being proposed here. Thank you.
Mr. Kusmirchuk on the amendment, and then we have Mr. Berthold, Mr. Perkins, Mr. Johns, and Mr. Shearer. Go ahead, Mr. Kusmirchuk on the amendment.
Yeah. Yes, of course. Thank you, Mr.
Back to your
Chair.
original amendment.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just wanted to state that I disagree with what my colleague, Mr. Genuis, had stated, the way that he characterized our position. We have shared the information in the contracts in the Indu Committee. That information is being shared as we speak. There are 6 committee meetings that are being dedicated to studying these very contracts. What we oppose, Mr. Chair, is what the president of Unifor characterized as a mill of misinformation that is working overtime. That is what we object to. Because of the sensitivity of this investment, how important it is to my community and to communities across Canada, is that we speak in facts, is that we do everything possible to refrain as much as possible from misinformation, from disinformation. that we speak in facts. That's the part that we oppose. And so, again, I just want to emphasize we have already voted in support in other committees to look at the documents, to look at the contracts, to study them. And I will tell you that when Canadians, I want this information to be shared with Canadians because they will be proud that you have a Liberal government that has delivered $30 billion worth of investments in the automotive sector in just the last 3 years, that will be creating thousands, tens of thousands of jobs across Canada, be it the 2,500 permanent jobs at Stellantis in Windsor, be it the 5,000 jobs, permanent jobs in St. Thomas because of Volkswagen, be it the 3,000 jobs at Northvolt in Quebec, or whether it's the hundreds of jobs being created in Maple Ridge, BC. All of those investments that the Liberal government delivered for Canada. And so I want Canadians to see the contracts and or to get the information, I should say, because they will see that these are agreements that they will be proud of and that are creating thousands of jobs in communities across Canada. Thank you.
Mr. Berthold, on the amendment.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. I'm pleased to see that my colleague also wants Canadians to be able to see the contract, and I hope that will be reflected when it comes time to vote on the motion before us. I think it would give him a chance to withdraw his amendment, Mr. Chair, because if he does indeed want Canadians to see these contracts, then the way to do that is to do what it says in the motion. There's a clear, specific process in place to allow the sharing of those documents. First of all, here at OGGO, and if the documents are not produced according to the terms of the motion, then we can go to the House and ensure that, once again, the Liberals do not fail to be transparent. This is something that has occurred regularly with the Liberals. I can remind you of the infamous Winnipeg Lab saga and another incident. Every time there's a tiny opening that the Liberals can use to avoid making documents public and being accountable to Canadians when it comes to contracts and management, well, you can be sure that Liberals will find that opening and do everything in their power to avoid sharing the contracts with Canadians. I was listening to my colleague talk about disinformation. Now, disinformation came from Liberals in the situation that we're dealing with. That is why we absolutely have to keep the motion as it was presented. 2 weeks ago in Windsor, we found out that there would be foreign replacement workers funded by taxpayers. Who did we learn that from? The chief of police, who was told that there would be 1,600 South Korean workers arriving to fill the jobs that had been promised to Canadians.
Point of order, Mr. Sousa?
Yes, point of order.
Thank you. I allowed a bit of leeway for Mr. Baines. I'll add a bit of leeway this way. Thanks.
Et Monsieur le Président,
And Mr. Chair, I am speaking directly to the amendment that is before us, and it's extremely important because the issue of disinformation was evoked. So first of all, the minister told us there would only be one foreign worker, and then it was mentioned there would be a few. And now we have confirmation that there are at least 900 foreign replacement workers who will be funded by taxpayers. Recently, we also found out that Northvolt in Quebec, that is receiving $7 billion in public subsidies, Well, Radio-Canada recently revealed that there would be hundreds of foreign workers coming to the Quebec plants, whereas the jobs should have been reserved for Canadians and specifically for Quebecers. As I said at the outset, the Liberals have a habit that if there's no pressure, if there's no deadline, then they're going to find a way to avoid responding to our request to see the contract. So if you'll allow me, Mr. Chair, I would like to read points G and H that the Liberals want to remove. The Chair be instructed to present a report to the House forthwith advising it that it has adopted this motion. The present motion is a motion asking for the production of documents that are contracts that will give 4 international companies billions of taxpayer dollars, Canadian taxpayer dollars, to create jobs that we thought would go to Canadians. So if $50 billion isn't enough for us to merit a 3-hour debate in the House on the relevance of producing that documentation, I'm not really sure, Mr. Chair, what would be good enough to allot 3 hours of debate. $50 billion is $3,000 per family. Right now, there are lineups in food banks. People are suffering. They are hungry. And at the same time, the government is spending this money. Now, if the goal was to create wealth, if they're so proud of these contracts, why not allow Canadians to see them? They should be able to explain why they're taking $3,000 from each family for these jobs. If this is about creating wealth, then let's see those contracts. Point H. This is the most crucial one, and my comment is specifically addressed to our colleague from the NDP, because I know that our colleague from the Bloc said that she was in agreement with G and H. So I'd like to read H, which the amendment is asking us to strike, Mr. Chair, because we haven't really talked about it much in French. In H it says, in the event the documents have not been produced as ordered by the committee to the chair's satisfaction, the chair, you, shall be instructed to present as soon as possible a further report to the House recommending that an order of the House do issue for the foregoing documents, provided that they shall be laid upon the table in both official languages and without redaction within 1 sitting day of the adoption of the order, and thereupon be deemed permanently referred to this committee. So what does that mean, Mr. Chair? It means that if, for whatever reasons, the Liberals refuse access to these documents, we are going to tell the House and tell all Canadians that the Liberals are refusing to produce the documents, and we will ask the House to produce an order to issue the documents and send them to this committee so that we can study them. So it's very simple. It's the right way of doing things, given the Liberals' track record when it comes to producing documents. And so, Mr. Chair, I think you'll understand that I'm against the proposed amendment. And I hope that all the opposition parties that are really here to insist that the government remain accountable will vote against the amendment. It is an insurance policy to make sure that the documents are produced here in this committee. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Berthold. I have Mr. Perkins, and then over to you, Mr. Johns, on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I spoke at the beginning when I introduced this motion. Now we have this amendment. I'd like to maybe address the second part of the amendment, which is H first. Well, actually, before I do that, perhaps I could address this issue in relation to this about the Industry Committee, as I believe I'm the only member of the Industry Committee that's here. The Volkswagen contract, our original request last year was for it to be released publicly, and the government amended it to make it secret so that we could only view it under in-camera conditions. Our proposal last week for these contracts, all of these contracts, was to make it public, and the government amended the motion in order to keep them secret, to keep them behind. So contrary to the impression that was left that these documents will be made public, they will not be made public under what's going on at the Industry Committee, and they will not be made public to provide the clarity that the Liberal MP for Windsor-Tecumseh mentioned, that he thinks that Canadians should all have access to it. Well, of course they should have access to it. The only way to have access and to clear up the confusion here is to deal with this and make them public, because it was Minister Champagne who negotiated, I don't know if I can, Minister of Industry, I don't know if I can use his name, the Minister of Industry who said at the start that all the jobs in construction and all the jobs that are permanent would be Canadian union jobs, and that turns out not to be the case. How do we know that? Because, of course, the ambassador for South Korea went to the community and met with officials and said they need housing for 1,600 South Koreans that are coming here to work at the plant. Now, number H here says that the documents that is trying to be removed by the Liberals is that in the event that the documents have not been produced or ordered by the committee, to the chairperson's satisfaction, the chair shall be instructed to present as soon as possible a further report to the House of Commons, recommending that the order of the House do issue for the foregoing documents, provided they shall be laid upon the table in both official languages and without redaction within one sitting day of the adoption of the order, and thereupon be deemed permanently referred to this committee. So what the heck's that mean for everybody? It means if the government doesn't produce these documents in spite of an order from this committee, that this has to go to the House. That's in the event that the documents aren't produced. So all members, including opposition members, I don't see what the risk is of having this in the motion, because if the government produces the documents, then this is not necessary. But it's absolutely necessary in the case that the government does not produce the documents, because we know that the government was given 8 weeks to produce the McKinsey documents for this committee and refused to do so on committee order. And so where did this committee end up? With no ability to report that to the House in the way that the government reacted. So the government already has a history of ignoring the document production requests of this. And the member for Windsor-Tecumseh, as I understand it, was at the forefront of refusing and arguing that those documents not be produced. So he has a history of ensuring that we don't have transparency into the expenditure of taxpayer dollars. And if he's so proud of these jobs and this initiative in his riding, he should be proud of the contract. He should be proud that the contract requires Canadian workers, which apparently it doesn't. And the question that's before us is, why would you want to hide this? The company presumably has the ability in the contract to take out the few bits of it they may think are commercially sensitive, but large parts of these contracts are not commercially sensitive, because the minister has talked about generalities of them before. But he's been very confused, because at the beginning he said, as I said, that there would be that they would be all Canadian jobs. And then as recently as this weekend, the Minister Champagne admitted that he didn't guarantee jobs would be for Canadians when he signed this $15 billion deal with Stellantis. Now he's saying he wants to sit down. That's the implication. Why would the minister need to sit down with Stellantis and Nexstar to figure out what the job situation is of foreign workers if foreign workers were not allowed in this contract in such massive numbers, 1,600 out of 2,500 workers? He's contradicting himself. At the beginning, these are Canadian workers. Now he says, obviously, I need to sit down and clarify the contract that I signed, that perhaps he didn't read, that the contract I signed, whether or not it allows us. So this is to the transparency.
We're going through a diatribe again.
Excuse me a
Let's
second,
just stick
Mr.
to the
Perkins.
sub-amendment and just move on.
We're on the amendment, but I hear you, Mr. Sousa, and I think Mr. Perkins is addressing some of these issues, but
This
continue,
is the
Mr.
issue.
Perkins.
I appreciate that, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate the point of order, but that is the heart of the issue. The heart of the issue is transparency. The government has a history in this committee, and quite frankly with the Winnipeg Labs as well, of ignoring production of documents motions. So yes, we're skeptical that the government will actually comply with a nice motion that doesn't include these things. And trust us, don't worry, because we've made sure they're secret in the industry committee, but we won't make sure, we don't want them to go public here, and we're going to maybe ignore this using the excuse of government members already, that it's already in another committee and nobody will be able to talk about it publicly. So let's just sit down and see how that goes and ignore what this committee does. And they have the out here, of course, in the French translation. I'm sure it'll take them an awful long time with 100,000 new bureaucrats since they were elected to actually translate these documents. The issue is that they will use every trick in the book to not produce these documents. They did not vote to have these public at the industry committee. In fact, they voted the opposite, to keep them secret. And that's what the members of the government side, the Liberal side, are trying to do here today, is to make them secret. And I think for the transparency of everybody, all the Canadian taxpayers, to know whether or not what the minister said when he announced this deal in the spring, or whether what he said this weekend, which version of the truth is it that the contract supports. And there's only one way to do it, which is to produce them. The problem is we don't trust the government's going to do that because of their history. And in G, the chair would be instructed to present a report to the House advising that it has adopted this motion. It's important, obviously, that the House be aware through the work of this committee that these documents have been requested, and that given the track record of this government, that we have the situation where everyone, all 338 members of the House of Commons, are aware that this committee has asked for these documents to be made public, and that if they don't, that there will be a report back to those same elected members of Parliament that they have refused once again to produce documents as compelled by a House of Commons committee and ignored the will of Parliament. So, Mr. Chair, I'll leave it there on this amendment for now. Thank you.
Thanks. Mr. Johns on the amendment, please, and then Mr. Scheer, and then Ms. Vignola.
No, I'm going to pass.
Mr. Scheer, please, and then Ms. Vignola.
Yeah, I just want to address some of the statements that were made. You know, the Liberal MP who's moving this amendment is saying that he opposes this production order because he wants to stick to the facts. Well, this order would get the facts. This production order, if passed, would produce the documents. I don't imagine there's a lot of editorialization in the documents. I'm not sure if the Prime Minister is going to write a cover letter with the documents, putting out some of the government's spin on it. But the contract itself will be the fact that should speak for itself. And that's the part that's so puzzling here, is that they're saying there's misinformation out there. Okay, well, what's wrong? Who's wrong? Is the local union rep who said that there were qualified Canadian workers who could fill these jobs but are going to be left in the cold, as taxpayer-funded foreign replacement workers come in to fill what should otherwise jobs that should otherwise go to Canadians? Is he wrong? Is the police representative wrong who said that they were asked to prepare for up to 1,600 foreign workers coming into the Windsor area? Was he wrong? Is the reporter wrong who first cited the number 1,600? Is it closer to 1,200, closer to 2,000? There could very well be some details that are being discussed publicly that could be off the mark. So what better way to ensure that we're all dealing with facts than to get the contract itself, than to see exactly how many jobs the Liberal government guaranteed would go to local Canadian qualified unionized workers, and how many jobs they've allowed the manufacturing company to fill with workers coming overseas. Once we get the contract, once we can see that, then we could have a conversation about whether or not they're letting in too many replacement workers, whether or not Stellantis needs more. Like we could actually have a discussion based on the facts once we get the contract in front of us. This comparison to the production order that was passed in another committee is totally bogus, because it doesn't count if you can't inform the Canadian people themselves. Basically, what they're doing is they're saying, like they've done, by the way, in many other instances, where they say, okay, we'll allow the actual information to be shared with parliamentarians, but we're going to force them to keep it secret. We're going to let them look at the contract, but they can't take notes. They can't talk to anybody else about it. They can't inform Canadians as to where their tax dollars are actually going. Well, that's no way to run a government. Then I'd like to address the idea that somehow sharing this information with the public would somehow be injurious or damage the overall deal. The government chose to make Canadians a shareholder in this deal by signing this contract. If we put ourselves in the shoes of shareholders in the private sector company, let's take Stellantis as an example. We could show up if we own shares in Stellantis, we could show up at an AGM, and we could demand to see the details of the contract. We could demand to know what our board of directors has decided to do with our investment dollars. Well, the same should be. It would only be fair for taxpayers to have the same rights as a Stellantis shareholder, because taxpayers are the shareholder on the government side of the equation. So informing Canadians what has happened with their tax dollar should be just as important as Stellantis shareholders knowing what happened with their investment dollar. And why should the Canadian taxpayer be treated as almost like a second-class shareholder versus what the shareholders in the private sector company have as their rights? Why should Canadian taxpayers have fewer rights to get to the bottom of this decision than Stellantis shareholders have? So that's what Conservatives are fighting here for. We're fighting to get the facts. We're fighting to protect the interests of tax dollars. And if the government is so proud of what they've done, if they're so sure that this is a good deal for Canadians, they're certainly not acting like it. I mean, they're acting like they're embarrassed of this. They're acting like they're afraid of what's going to come to light. So if I were in the shoes of my Liberal counterparts, I would be eager to get this published. In fact, I think my Liberal counterpart actually said that he wanted more Canadians to know about this deal. Well, great. Let's make sure every Canadian knows every aspect of this deal. Let's publish the contract, and let's ensure, this brings me to the actual amendment itself, let's make sure that this motion actually comes to fruition, that it actually gets results. Because we've seen too many examples where there have been orders like this that don't include an enforcement mechanism, and the government just ignores it. We've seen them say things like, we remember with the SNC-Lavalin scandal, they said they were going to waive cabinet confidence, they were going to waive attorney-client privilege, but not for cabinet confidences. So we still don't actually know what type of pressure was applied to Jody Wilson-Raybould during that whole scandal, because even in that example, they refused to waive all cabinet confidences. We've seen this with McKinsey production orders. Remember that sordid affair where the government failed to comply with production orders to get to the bottom of McKinsey's role in both government consulting and with its involvement in big pharmaceutical companies and the role they played in causing the opioid crisis. So it seems like there's a lot of agreement. There's a lot of agreement that the facts should come to light. We're all agreed on that. Sounds like Liberals at least pretend they are. They claim they are. They said it. We all agree on that. We should all agree on the important role that committees play as parliamentarians. If we take off our partisan hats, no matter what the order is, once a committee adopts it, we should all agree, even if we voted the wrong way on it, that the will of the committee should be respected. When Parliament exercises its privilege on behalf of Canadians and on behalf of Canadian taxpayers to inform the public as to what has happened with their tax dollars, we should all agree on that principle as well. So if we agree that the facts need to be made public, if we agree that the work of parliamentary committees is important, and that when they pass motions and issue instructions and production orders, that those orders should be respected. And if we agree with the important role that Parliament plays in protecting tax dollars and informing the public as to decision making, then I don't really know. Like this should pass unanimously, like unamended. This should be a routine motion. We should have been, talking about this for maybe 5 minutes and then move on with the committee's work, because we all agree on those principles, unless there are some people on the committee who are pretending they agree with those principles, but in reality they're not, because it's just a phony smokescreen for covering up the Prime Minister's error on this. So I hope my colleague will, the NDP member who proposed this motion, will have some time to reflect on what the problem would be with passing it unamended and passing it in its original form, because I really do think it achieves his objectives, the objectives he stated. So I know we're coming to the end of the allotted time here.
I'm just going to interrupt you there, colleagues. I'm going to suspend, because I think we're kind of at the end of our rope, so to speak. So we are suspended. We'll continue this at a later time. Thanks, everyone.